what are people in Monterey Park saying? We are afraid, but we are going to dance. That is an inspiration for all communities. So I think the future of Stop the Hate is to share the stories of each other.
麻省理工科技评论表示，新冠病毒大流行呢是第一个真正的社群媒体资讯病。而国家地理杂志呢也说了，在大流行期间，社群媒体上报道了假新闻的水平上升。由此可知呢，社群媒体助长了错误资讯的传播。例如，中国的恐慌导致了错误资讯以及疾病本身的传播。又另外呢，错误的资讯有可能使大流行呢变得比现在更加的危险，或者是制造出意想不到的隐患，像是政客呢为他的政治目的来操弄了社会，制造分裂，而对这个仇视亚裔以及仇恨暴力的案件也会节节上升。这些都跟社群媒体的错误报道或者是传播有着不可分割的关联。而在今天的仇恨边缘当中，我们将为大家邀请到的是资深媒体人 Sandy Cross， 从媒体的角度带大家关心这个话题。欢迎收看今天的仇恨边缘。在今天的节目当中，我们要特别从媒体的角度带您关注种族歧视、仇恨亚裔或者仇恨暴力等相关的议题。为大家邀请到是这 Ethic Media Services 的这个行政总监，同时也是资深媒体人 Sandy Cross 来到我们节目当中，一块来欢迎他。Hi Sandy, how are you?
I'm fine. Happy to be with Skylink.
You know, it's my honor to have an interview with you.
It's really a pleasure to be at Skylink.
Yes, I have been in the media industry over 20 years.
I have been in the media industry since 1964.
Wow, 1964, wow.
And I started in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a time when the Vietnam War was the epic story of the decade, if not the century. And at the same time, you had these amazing developments going on in China. It was only 14 years after the revolution, and it was very dynamic. I would say Hong Kong was at the center of the most important developments going on worldwide.
Yes. So thank you for sharing. But I was wondering about the mission and the background of the Ethic Media Service. So
well, it grew out of that experience, living on the edge of China, working in Southeast Asia, feeling what it was like to see the world outside of America. So you get with ethnic media a lens that is both global and local, and that tells you stories from inside the communities that ethnic media is reporting, not from the outside in, but the inside out. But I would say to understand the politics, the social life, the whole transformation of San Francisco into a cosmopolitan city, you had to know what was in Chinese language media. And if you had to know what was in Chinese language media, well, you certainly had to know what was in Spanish language media. If you were in Los Angeles, you were living in an Hispanic ocean with islands of other groups, language groups. So, and in those years, the story of Wen Ho Lee became such an issue that united all of the Chinese media. And the Chinese media was way ahead of what we call mainstream media, the English language media. The English language media said, Wen Ho Lee, the China spy, maybe he's guilty. The Chinese language media, whether it was from Hong Kong, whether it was from Taiwan, Singapore, they knew that there was a grave injustice and that Wen Ho Lee as the China spy which is how he was described in the New York Times, was being scapegoated. So the Chinese media really won my admiration. Suddenly, people began to realize this is a big sector. And if you added the audiences of ethnic media in our Bay Area group where we started, they were bigger than the audiences of the two major English language newspapers at the time, the Chronicle and the Examiner. So that got people's attention, and we began to do multilingual polling. Nobody had polled in Chinese. Nobody had polled in Vietnamese or Korean or Spanish. Well, yes, in Spanish. There had been polling done in Spanish because the 1990s were years known as the Pete Wilson years of strong anti-immigrant initiatives, 187, for example. So there was the beginning of a realization, hey, we gotta know what Spanish language immigrants think. But what about Chinese? What about Korean? Yes. How can you talk about public opinion when you're only talking about the English language sector? That's not public. Well, ethnic media can explode that notion by creating an inclusive forum for reporting, for conversation, for advocacy. So it was incredibly exciting to go from having run a mainstream news service, which was called Pacific News Service, to New America Media, which is what our original name was before we became Ethnic Media Services.
Yeah, wow. I really got a lot of information from this conversation. Thank you. Yeah, but I really want to let you share more information and story. However, we need to take a break. 我们媒体在这个种族歧视、仇视亚裔或者是仇恨暴力的这些新闻当中，又该如何平衡报道呢？我们先稍微休息一下，待会继续带您关注。新闻媒体组织和公众使用社群媒体来传播有关新冠大流行的相关资讯，当中就有一些错误的资讯，很有可能就会被有心人所利用，或者是造成恐慌。这些都是直接或者间接对于生活在美国的亚裔就会造成负面的影响，像是仇恨暴力案件的上升。而在今天的节目当中，我们就从媒体甚至是缩小到社交媒体上来带您关注今天的话题。为大家邀请到是资深媒体人 Sandy Cross， 我们一块来欢迎她。Hi Sandy。Hi。Let's talk about hate crime. As we can see, surge of the hate crimes in the past 3 years. So what do you see is the biggest the cause behind it?
I think President Trump gave people permission to hate openly. Wow. And he defined China as an enemy. And he, by extension, defined Chinese as carriers of COVID. But in the case of Chinese particularly, which always have been threatening, always, as Helen Zia has written, the stranger, the permanent stranger, we saw it with Wen Ho Lee. So I really think the hate builds on a very long-standing distrust and lack of respect and fear.
Yes. So during the national and the local coverage of COVID-19 or stuff of the hate, how do you think about the media has been doing covering this kind of topics?
I think that there's been excellent efforts at a time. I mean, in some ways, this is ironically, a time when ethnic media are seen as more indispensable than ever. You think of the census, you think of the pandemic, and suddenly government realizes, oh my God, we really need to reach people with limited English proficiency, and we're talking, of course, to a large extent about Chinese language immigrants as well as Spanish, others. So there's been, in the 25 years I've been watching ethnic media, a growing appreciation of the value of in-language ethnic media. And the census was a highlight of that. Major investment in ethnic media to reach people, a major investment during the pandemic to use ethnic media to reach people about vaccines. But it's not been accompanied by the kind of resources that could balance out the losses ethnic media have sustained. So the loss of reporting when there was the lockdown with the pandemic, of advertising. Loss of advertising means you cut back reporters. So the very time when ethnic media were needed the most, they've had to deal with very severe losses in revenue and cutbacks in reporting. I think this is going with hate, is that ethnic media does its best to document incidents of hate and to give victims of hate a human face, not just a statistic, to tell the story of what happened. I see this effort being made with Monterey Park. I see the effort being made with Half Moon Bay, but with very limited resources. So it is hard to step back and think, what is the broader meaning of this? Where is this going? And I will tell you that the bigger story for me at a time when hate is rising is the fact that intermarriage rates are growing much more dramatically. In other words, you have rising hate, and that comes often with growing awareness. Okay, the politician, the president talked about blaming Chinese, so all this derogatory stereotypes building on history. But at the same time, people are marrying each other across racial lines at an unprecedented rate. Which is the epic story? The rise in hate, or the fact that there have been 250% increase in intermarriage across color lines? Love stories across color lines is, to me, a more powerful story to tell, but it's hard when you're operating with limited resources, trying to keep up with the news, to step back and help people see this is not the only thing happening. There are other things happening, and they're connected, but it's so hopeful to me. Every household that is a mixed marriage household is a cosmopolitan culture. It is. We recently got a story about an African-American Korean man. Mother was Korean, father was African-American, who married a Vietnamese. These are combinations, and they have 2 beautiful children. These are combinations that are repeating themselves all across the state at dramatic increase. So at the same time, there's also a lot of love, and I think we need to give that attention so that people don't become overwhelmed by a sense that we're all breaking apart and that we're on the edge of racial conflict. We need to know each other better.
Yes. Yeah. So no matter where do we come from, no matter your skin is yellow or white, or no matter what different you are, we are a family, right? Yeah, thank you for sharing. Let's take a break from here. Okay. 是的，这个社交媒体或者是新媒体对我们今天讨论话题又会带来多少的影响呢？待会继续带你来关注。 错误的资讯可以策略性的传播，但有时候也可能是偶然的传播。Facebook、Twitter 或者是 YouTube 都增加对垃圾邮件过滤的依赖，但毕竟难防成千上万的错误资讯内容。一旦错误资讯发酵，在美国的亚裔又该如何面对这样的问题呢？我们继续请到的是我们今天的特别嘉宾，资深媒体人 Sandy Cross， 继续带我们来关注这个话题。Hi, Sandy. I think this segment we're going to talk about the media part. So, what's the biggest challenge for the ethnic media?
Well, it's doing more with less because the pandemic really cut into the resources of ethnic media. So, for the most part, most of the ethnic media we work with have had to reduce their reporting staffs because revenue has been less. How do we do that? I definitely feel there is a growing interest in collaborating. There's very little cross-racial collaboration to tell each other's stories. If you ride Muni, you will see when a young African American gets on Muni, very often older Chinese will move to another part of the bus. There is tremendous fear. At the same time, in the African American community, there is a sense that somehow they're going to be cheated, or they're going to be lose out in a competition at school, or they're going to be made to look foolish compared to the Chinese or the Asian. And this, honestly, the only way to combat that, yes, you can have the lecture by the politician, the sermon by the religious leader, but it's we journalists telling stories about each other that really will break that sort of taboo that we have about each other.
So, as a long-time media expert, so what do you think are the biggest difference among like a traditional media like 20 years ago and like a new media nowadays and even the ethnic media?
The amazing thing to me is it's like an incredible explosion. What was once mainstream media, and then there was alternative media that connected disaffected, political discontented people and helped give them their news. Now, there's no such thing as mainstream. What do you do if there's no mainstream? Everybody has their own media platform, and social media has become the dominant voice. So you have misinformation and disinformation, some of it deliberate, and some of it just because people love to talk, they love to gossip, and they love to share stories. So some of it is innocent, but all of it means none of us have a common understanding of what's going on. And this is why I'm saying those of us who are serious journalists, who really want to help our audiences make sense of the world around us.
Yes, so how do we educate our audience?
The education is the critical factor, and I really think we need to look to each other for support. It is impossible to do it alone. Ethnic Media Services gets help from our Chinese colleagues, gets help from Latino, Spanish language colleagues, from Black colleagues. I think we need more efforts, as you are doing with me, to reach out and start conversations and build on experiences and perspectives from across all the lines that divide us.
One more question. So what do you see in the future of the Stop the Hate movement?
Somehow we need to give validation and sympathy, as people are trying to do now with the victims of Monterey Park, and to tell the resilience. What are people in Monterey Park saying? We are afraid, but we are going to dance. This is the most powerful image, that when you're about to give in to despair, you're going to turn the music on and you're going to dance. That is an inspiration for all communities. You don't have to be Chinese to want to know that story. So I think the future of Stop the Hate is to share the stories of each other with a realization that it's both entertainment, in the sense that people love to hear about the trials and tribulations of other people, but they also, this is also really essential for ethnic media. Media can tear each other apart, or they can knit each other together. And I think this is a splendid opportunity for ethnic media to work together, not just about the stories of hate, but more importantly, the stories of finding each other, because just telling the stories of hate by itself won't do it.
So as I mentioned earlier, I really get a lot of information from this conversation, and I really do appreciate your time. So looking forward, have another chance to interview again. Okay.
Well, I appreciate Skylink, and the segments you have done on briefings and news stories we've tried to develop have been among the best I've seen. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. 疫情期间，许多政府鼓励采取保持人身距离的措施，这也使社群媒体的使用量急剧增加。这样的转变已经是影响全世界对于社群媒体的使用跟依赖，同时也成就社群网络除了娱乐打发时间之外，也成为资讯传播的主要力量。水能载舟，也能覆舟。不正确的资讯传播内容会造成恐慌以及心理健康带来负面的影响。除了媒体人需要负上一定程度的责任之外，受众者、阅读者是否有能力去分辨真假新闻呢？不要人云亦云呢？这个问题我们值得去思考。感谢您收看今天的仇恨边缘，我们下回节目再见。